The content of this video applies equally to being in an interview situation or whether you're selling something, a product or service. The reason for that is because if you're in an interview, you're selling yourself. So the same things apply. The key to selling anything is to listen. It's not to talk, because actually, if you listen and ask the right questions, then you can reply with the answers that your purchaser, the person on the other end, your future employer wants to hear. I'm not advocating making things up or just telling them what they want to hear without any substance to it. But if you can't understand what they're looking for in their job role in an interview situation, then you're not going to be in the best place to position yourself as the solution for that. So that's the first thing. The first thing is to ask questions and to listen. So those questions are very, very important, and there are two reasons for that. One is it provides you with the information you need to be able to position yourself as the solution to what their problem is. By asking the right questions in the correct way, you'll do a number of things. So one of those things is you'll take back control of the process. Now, what that means is, up until this point, the process has probably been in their control. They've posted an advert, or they've decided they need a new candidate, a new incumbent for the role they have. And they've gone out to the market to try and find that person. And then they've gone through a process of elimination to get rid of the ones that are unsuitable. So everything on their side is very much proactive. They're the ones in control. They've selected you. They've invited you for the interview. And then if everything goes to plan on their side, they're going to ask you questions and they're going to continue that process of elimination to basically say you're not suitable, or if you're lucky, they will. But actually, a lot of people are looking for reasons why not rather than reasons why. So to maximize your chances of success, you need to take back some of that control, if not all of it. Now that depends on who you're dealing with. But the worst case scenario is you take back half of that control. Now that control can be seen in a number of different ways. One can be actually who's doing the talking. The second thing can be who's asking the questions. And the third thing is, how is that conversation or that interview steering? So let's get into this then, because this is about questioning and answers. For your interviewers or your customer to understand what you can provide, you need to ask the right questions. Those questions should always be open questions. These are questions that you cannot say yes or no to. So they have long tail answers. So for example, questions that start with why, what, when, where, and how. You cannot say yes or no to them. So if someone said to you, what brought you here tonight? And you replied, yes or no, they would clearly put you straight in the bin as being not very mentally stable. The same applies to all the others. What the reality of this is that when you ask one of these questions, these open questions that start with one of those things, they have to reply with a long answer. The longer the answer, the better, because you have a time limit. When you go for an interview, here's the start and here's the finish. This is going to be roughly 1 hour. If you're incredibly good, it might go to 1.5 hours. And if you're completely rubbish, they'll be out of there in 30 minutes. So that is a rough guide as to how successful you've been in an interview. You don't need them to tell you that you have been rejected or you have got the job, because if you're out of there in about 30 minutes, you're not going to get the job. Anything over an hour is looking pretty good. So this is the middle way. This is 30 minutes. You need to make sure that the people interviewing you or your customers or whatever are talking for at least that. That's not the second half, that's 50%. The reason for that is twofold. One, you're gathering information. For your answers, which is your half. And the second bit is that you're reducing the time you talk. So the first one is that you're gathering information that you can then use to feed back to them on what they're looking for. So you are then providing them with yourself as the solution. And the second thing is that by sharing the time equally, 50-50, you've reduced the time that you're talking by 50%. Now, what that really means is you've reduced the time that you could be making a real mess of things and putting your foot in your mouth. So it's absolutely essential that you develop and ask the right questions to get them to fill up 30 minutes or more. The ideal solution here, and I can tell you from experience that this does happen, is you get them to talk for 80% of the time. The reason why is because people love the sound of their own voice, and they will talk themselves into how excellent a candidate you are on the basis that you asked them a couple of really good questions and they did all the talking and they sold you your own job. So that's the ideal solution, but that doesn't happen very often. But the best middle ground is literally middle way. Whatever time it takes, you need to be asking for them to be talking for 50% of the time. So those questions need to start with why, what, when, where, and how. They should be relevant to the position, they should be relevant to the company, and they should be relevant to the future. I'm going to run through a couple of questions here that run in line with this. So those questions that you're going to ask to fill up to 50%, you're going to get that from the job specification, from doing some research and from everything like that. And there are other videos I've done that will cover some of those questions. So I hope that bit is clear. The second part of this video really is about sharing responsibility and having some control over this entire process. If you followed this process here that I've explained, you have some control. You have 50% of the airtime that you are no longer responsible for, and you have 50% of the airtime that you can control to steer what their questions are. I will go into that in more detail in another video. This one is going to be quite short. So the next part of the hiring process is going to be about your life. It's about you. We all need a job to survive, or at least a job to sort of make some money, or if it's not to make some money, give us some purpose to do something. Because actually doing nothing gets pretty boring after a while. Being on holiday gets pretty boring after a while. So we tend to go out and find a job. But what that actually means is that we are filling our lives with a purpose and a group of people that are not our friends, family, and loved ones. By going out to work with that cohort of people, you're spending more time with them than you are with your friends, family, and loved ones. So it's a really important thing that you understand and evaluate the positions and the companies and everything about that situation before you go and join up. Because if you don't, you're going to be unhappy. You're not going to provide the value that they think they were employing you for, and so on. It's just a chain reaction. So you have to ask sensible questions to them to understand more about what the offer is. And I've got 3 questions here that I always ask when I'm in that situation. It's very important. They do put them on the spot a little bit, but the answers provide you with a really good window into some key metrics of that business that you're potentially looking to join. So this isn't about being offered and feeling, oh, thank you very much, I've been offered, I'm so great, I'm so gracious and grateful, and oh, perfect, I'm going to come and join you. When do you want me to do it? Oh, how high do you want me to jump? No, this isn't about that. This is about you making a decision as well. And essentially, the outcome of this process is that you're going to have an offer that you can refuse, because hopefully you'll have more than one offer and you'll have other things in the pipeline. You'll be able to evaluate that. But even if you just get one, your position in this whole entire process is that you have the right to refuse. So if you have the right to refuse, you need to understand what you're going to accept or refuse. 3 essential questions you should be asking them about the job role that you're going to go for. So these questions don't really have a lot of relevance for the exact job that you are going to go for. This is more company-wide. And the first one is, what is your churn rate or your attrition rate? This is a metric that they should know. This means how many people leave the company in a year out of all of the employees they have. What percentage of people leave? So typically the average attrition rate is around 10%. So for every 100 people that they have on their books, every year they'll replace 10. So some of those people will leave because they're retiring or they're moving house or something like that, that is not relevant to the performance of the company. But if you've asked that question and they say, and bearing in mind, you have to take everything that they say with a pinch of salt, because they might not tell you the truth. But even so, you can double check their responses, because there are places out there that will give you a rough indication. And when I say a rough indication, it's never accurate, because it's compiled from people on LinkedIn that work there and leave, people on Glassdoor that work there and leave. And in order to get that data, they need to have the data in the first place. So LinkedIn statistics will only count the people on their site who have LinkedIn profiles. And I'm sure that you would know lots of people in the workforce that don't have a LinkedIn profile. So if LinkedIn is saying it's a 15% attrition rate or it's a 2% attrition rate, you need to take that with a pinch of salt. But in any case, you're going to ask them, what's the attrition rate? They're going to tell you something like 10%, maybe 14%. They might not like to disclose that information, but that's a relevant question to ask, and you need to know, because the reason you're asking that question is not because you're interested in the 10, the 20, the 50%. It's because that number is the evidence of how good their management is, how good their products and services are, the support, everything about the role that you're going for, everything about the company as a whole. So if they say they have a 50% attrition rate, that's really bad, and there are problems there. That's a company you should walk away from, because you've only got a 1 in 2 chance of it being a success. So you're going to be looking for another job, and that's painful. If it's a 3%, you know most people are going to be there long term, so that's a better bet. There are other parts of this that come into that mix. Maybe it's 3% because they pay very, very well. Maybe it's, but generally speaking, the bigger the number, the worse it's going to be. The second question I ask the interviewers how long they personally have been there, because the answer to that is also reasonably relative to the first one. So if they all say, well, I've only been there 6 months, then that's a bit of a problem there, because one of them should have been there for longer, if not most of them. So it also shows a little bit of interest in them personally. You can ask them, why did they join the company? That type of thing. And the third one, which is also relevant, is to ask them which part of their business or which products create the largest part of their revenue. Because if your role is centered on a part that actually doesn't do an awful lot and could even be diminishing, then there is red flags there that you might want to consider when you're making your decision. Because that brings the conversation into where the money is being generated and where your value can be. So this is one of the questions that does actually go back to another video that I did previously. which is about talking to the monkey, not the organ grinder. An additional question to ask defines the position and how they see it versus how you see it. Quite often, candidates go along to an interview or go along for a position and they have in their own mind what they think it's going to be. And regardless of what it says on paper, regardless, they think that a sales manager does that, or a marketing manager does that, or something else does that. You need to really drill down and understand what that position is, because you need it defined. So, and the reason for this is you need to understand what support network you have within the business. So a lot of people that take jobs and leave quite quickly within their organization have entered into an agreement with their company on the basis of something that doesn't actually become true. They might take on a role as a salesperson that is presented to them as being part of a team, but actually the reality is that they're sole contributors as part of that team. And some of them will be sole contributors, which means that basically they do everything themselves, and the team is also sole contributors, is going to be competing against them. So you need to understand how that's worked out. You also need to understand that if this is a sales environment that I'm talking about here, but it applies to absolutely everything, that whatever you do can be supported with the functions that enable you to go off and continue doing what you're doing. So in a sales environment, again, you go out and you sell something, you need that to be delivered. That could even just be the delivery driver getting in his van and going off and delivering it. If they don't have enough vans and drivers, then your reputation is going to be tarnished because you're selling stuff that can't be delivered. And you can extrapolate that into much, much bigger projects and programs and multinational situations. If you don't have the information and they don't have that team set up, if you're relatively junior, then that's a big problem. If you're not junior, then you can obviously sell yourself as being the one to solve that problem by taking on a team. And these are opportunities that will come about, and with the right questioning, that is. And then the final question, which is equally important, puts them on the spot a little bit, is to ask them the question, what does your typical training program look like? Let's see. And what you should be looking out for here when you ask these questions is what happens when you stop talking. If someone immediately jumps in with an answer, that's okay, that's quite good. But if they look at each other, that's a massive red flag. If anyone looks at one of the others before they answer, this is effectively them saying, what should I say? Because they don't have an answer, they're bullshitting. They're going to be, flying by the seat of their pants at this point. If they look at one of the others before they answer, no, that's a lie, what's going to come out of their mouth. So these questions can be rephrased in whatever format you like and in your own words. But the key thing is that by asking these questions, you're showing yourself to be someone that gives some sort of strategy and thought and deeper dive into your decision making. And that's a valuable trait in anyone that's joining a business, is the ability to be able to make good decisions and not bad ones. So don't be afraid to ask slightly difficult questions or questions that will put them on the spot, because you need to understand not only the situation you're potentially investing your life into, but also you need to be presenting yourself as someone that is actually capable of asking those questions, and the questions are sensible questions, and you are, expecting a decent response. This is not a one-way street. You're evaluating them as much as they are you. So make sure they provide you with a good enough reason to join their company. The last thing, absolutely important, when you ask a question, shut up, okay? Because the silence itself, the one who talks first is the loser. So when you ask a question, you don't say anything. You just sit there. It can get really, really uncomfortable. But you wait, because the one that speaks first is the loser. I'm sure that was helpful. Check out my other videos for other tips and tricks, and like, subscribe and comment if you want to say something that's useful to others. You want to say something can give you some help with, put it down. I'll explore it and maybe make a video about it. It's great. Thanks very much, and see you soon.